Alright, so welcome back to News Dose, and I'd say one of the more interesting stories these past few years has been the Square Enix PlayStation partnership. It kind of feels like Square Enix hasn't exactly gotten what they want out of that partnership, and now they're just trying to pivot away from their exclusivity. And, well, we got some more information today that that's absolutely the case, and that Xbox will be a big part for their future. So we'll get into all of that, and then we'll also talk about PlayStation's next big game, because it might not just be a PlayStation game, or at least in the future. And I think this brings up something very interesting, just kind of considering how tied this is to the PlayStation brand. Now let's just go and jump right into things, though, starting off with Metal Gear Solid. Now, last year we got Metal Gear Solid 1 Volume 1, which includes Metal Gear Solid 1 through 3, plus some extras. But as soon as that released, you could just kind of cue the speculation and the rumors. Everybody wants to kind of know where exactly is Volume 2 with games like Metal Gear Solid 4, Peace Walker, and hey, maybe even Metal Gear Rising. I feel like that would be a pretty awesome collection, part thanks to the inclusion of Metal Gear Solid 4, which to this day is still exclusive to the PlayStation 3. So there's really not a great way to play Metal Gear Solid 4 in 2024 unless you want to buy a secondhand PS3. Well, Konami was asked about this in an interview, and this was their response. We definitely are aware of this situation with Metal Gear Solid 4. Unfortunately, we can't really say too much at the moment with Volume 1 containing Metal Gear Solid 1 through 3, ... You can probably connect the dots. Right now, we still are internally concerned about what we should be doing for the future of the series. So sorry, we can't really reveal anything at the moment, but stay tuned. So, yeah, I mean, the future of Metal Gear is very bright. We could get more Metal Gear Solid games in the future, which includes, yes, a Volume 2. If it wasn't already clear enough that they have a Volume 2 planned that includes Metal Gear Solid 4, then, I mean, they practically confirmed it here without saying anything specifically. I think this is a huge deal, though. I know a lot of people love Metal Gear Solid 3. That is the fan favorite in the franchise because, honestly, it is a great game. But Metal Gear Solid 4... for me, that's easily my favorite within the series. I mean, they're all great, but again, Metal Gear Solid 4 is my favorite. Sure, it's sometimes a movie, a very good one, I have to say, but I think it's also an amazing game, and it's really just kind of a shame that it's been limited for as long as it's been. Thankfully, though, it sounds like that will soon change, and as soon as we hear more, of course, I got you guys' back. Now, we also got an update for Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince. This game released exclusively for the Nintendo Switch last year, and while a lot of people really like this game, one problem that it has had is its performance. It just does not run great on the Switch with frame rate problems. So that's why I'm happy to say that Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince is now slated to release for PC, iOS, and Android on September 11th. Unfortunately, they still haven't announced an Xbox or PlayStation version. I do hope that will change sometime in the future, but in the meantime, I think this is going to be a fantastic game to play on something like the ROG Ally or something like the Steam Deck. You know, that way it's still going to feel like a Nintendo Switch game. You can play it in handheld mode, but with actual good performance. Again, that was really one of the only consistent complaints with the Switch version, so this is an extremely welcome addition to have it available on hardware that is more capable. If anything else, I just kind of say that if you like Dragon Quest, or if you like monster taming type of games, because that's really what this is, then maybe go and put it on your wish list. Again, it will release on September 11th for $40 US. Moving on, and this might come as some surprise, but the PlayStation 5 is receiving yet another price hike over in Japan. You can see here posted up by Tom Warren that Sony is raising PS5 prices in Japan on September 2nd. Both models are going up by 1,300 yen, nearly $90, in the third PlayStation 5 console price hike in Japan since its launch in 2020. And that really is kind of the thing about this situation. This is something that we have seen throughout the entirety of this generation, and not just for PlayStation, but also for the Xbox Series as well. The Xbox Series also received a price hike in Japan just here recently, and the reason that all of this is happening in Japan specifically is just because of the decreasing value of the yen. So I don't want to make this out to sound like PlayStation is the only one doing this, because that's just not true. At the end of the day, prices have been trending in the wrong direction for these past 4 years. But what I will kind of say here is that does kind of make me wonder about the PlayStation 5 Pro and its launch price. All evidence points to this thing being announced imminently. But this is a very different situation compared to the PS4 Pro and how it launched just last generation. By the time the PS4 Pro released, Sony was able to bring down the price for the original PlayStation 4. But as we're kind of seeing here, I don't know if Sony really has that same luxury for the PlayStation 5 Pro. So it'll be very interesting to see just how exactly they position the PS5 Pro's price tag when they announce it. Right now, I'm kind of hoping that it'll be no more than $550 at most, but I guess we'll see here soon enough. Alright, so since we're on the topic of PlayStation trends, we might as well just go and talk about the partnership between Square Enix and PlayStation. Last generation, they formed, in my opinion, what was a mind-boggling partnership with one another. Now, this makes perfect sense for somebody like PlayStation because they're the ones that's going to reap the rewards here. This helps them sell consoles. But I have to ask, what does this really do for somebody like Square Enix? Sure, they're going to get an immediate bag of money, but does that really pay for all of the missed opportunity that you have on all of these other platforms? I can understand when it comes to smaller IP or unknown franchises like Forspoken. Honestly, I don't think that game would have sold on anything, to be quite honest with you. But when it comes to a franchise like Final Fantasy, this is a massive name in the game industry. It's one of the biggest JRPG franchises of all time. So this is a franchise that really doesn't need any type of exclusive partnership. This is a game that's going to sell itself on Xbox. It's going to sell itself on PC. And, even more so is that it's a franchise that clearly has a future beyond just Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy XVI. There's going to be more Final Fantasy games. So you would think for a franchise like this that they would want to grow that fan base across all platforms evenly, because that's what's best for the future of the Final Fantasy franchise. If they were to launch Final Fantasy XVII across PC, Xbox, and PlayStation on day one, well, that's not only good for that game, but it's also good for the next game as well, because now you're starting to acclimate PC and Xbox fans with the Final Fantasy series a little bit more. Right now, PlayStation fans obviously have had their fill with this franchise, but there's still so many potential people out there that Square Enix hasn't reached because they entered this exclusive deal with PlayStation. And that not only hurts the sales for Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy XVI, but it could also impact their future titles as well, just because they have a very lopsided fan base built up. But it seems like with their new CEO, they've finally woken up to that effect. Now they're taking after companies like Sega. Sega started to bring over games like Yakuza and the Persona series to more platforms. And just look at how good they're doing. That really needs to be how Square Enix approaches their games as well, their big-time franchises. And it seems like that's definitely the direction that they're going in. In a new interview, Square Enix said this: "At Square Enix, we have been changing our policy, so now we are moving towards the policy of releasing our games on a multi-platform basis, and we really want as many players as possible to play our titles. With Final Fantasy XIV as the starting point, we do want to release more Square Enix games on Xbox, and there will be more of our titles released on Xbox. So I hope players will look forward to future things to come on the platform." Now, they also confirmed that Final Fantasy XIV received a strong response on Xbox. Now, they weren't exactly too specific about that, but it's clear as day. Square Enix, under their new leadership, wants to be a more multi-platform company, as they very well should be. It's better for their future, and that's really exciting, not just for Xbox, but really I'd say for the entire game industry as a whole. It's better for PC, it's better for Xbox, and in some ways it's even better for Nintendo, especially if their next platform is capable enough to run some of these games. In the future, we'll probably get more day-and-date multi-platform games. Games like Final Fantasy XVII and Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 now has a very good chance of releasing as completely multi-platform titles again, as they probably should be. And I think by this point, it's not a matter of if Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy 16 will be on Xbox. I think now it's really just kind of a matter of when. I mean, even Square Enix suggested as much just earlier this year when they said this about Final Fantasy 16. It's not over in the sense that we have the PC version. Once the PC version is released, we're thinking about hopefully moving to other platforms as well. However, that's not really talking about the story. It's more about moving it onto different platforms. That is directly from Square Enix, and I think it pretty much says everything that we need to know. It absolutely will happen because Square Enix wants it to happen. Square Enix is done with their exclusive Sony partnership, and if you've been paying attention, that really shouldn't come as a big surprise. Both Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy 16 sold below expectations. They still sold well, but it wasn't quite as high as their lofty expectations were. And like I said before, I don't think exclusivity is good for the future of Final Fantasy. So as a fan of Final Fantasy, I think this is just absolutely amazing news. Now, one last thing before we go, and this one actually surprised me a little bit more, but the Astro Bot creative director was asked about a VR version for Astro Bot, and he responded, "No chance, it's designed for a different medium." He then continued on to say that there is a 0% chance that it would come out of VR because it would be a different game. Now, that's important just for context because in the same interview, he was also later on asked about a possible PC version. And his response to that was, well, we want to hear from you. Absolutely, we want to hear from you. Now, that's actually really interesting in a sense that he completely shut down a VR version, but he didn't completely rule out a PC version. Now, that's not him necessarily confirming anything per se, but it does kind of sound like there is at least some kind of possibility that it could happen in the future, which, I mean, to be fair here, we know that Sony has been ramping up their PC initiative. By this point, I completely expect most of their games to get a PC version sometime in the future. But I will say in the case of Astro Bot, it's kind of a unique situation just kind of considering how much its gameplay is tied to the PlayStation 5 hardware. In order to experience Astro Bot to its fullest, you do need to use the DualSense controller. Now, okay, the DualSense works on PC, but that doesn't necessarily mean that most PC users actually use a DualSense controller. So in that sense, its market might be a little bit more limited compared to some of their other releases. But I will say, as long as it works with other controllers, which from my understanding, the new Astro Bot does, so they could technically do a PC port and it could work. Even without the DualSense, Astro historically is still a great platformer, and I fully 100% expect the new Astro Bot to be the same. I expect it to be another great platformer, whether that be with a DualSense or with a standard controller. So, hey, it could be a cool PC release eventually down the road, albeit maybe a little surprising. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope you all enjoyed the video. As always, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you like this type of content. But until next time, peace out.